The moment my son smiled at the crowd and accepted his promotion as Vice President of Finance, I stood up from my chair and ruined the happiest night of his life. "My name is Vanessa Webb," I said into the microphone, my hands shaking so badly I could barely hold it. "And the man you're celebrating tonight stole nearly $200,000 from his own mother." The ballroom went silent. Ethan froze on stage. His wife, Claire, turned pale beside him. But I wasn't finished. Because the worst part wasn't the money. It was the way my own son tried to convince everyone that I was too old and too confused to notice he was destroying my life. Before I tell you what happened next, I'd really love to hear from you. Have you ever trusted someone so deeply that you never imagined they could betray you? Let me know in the comments how you would react if this happened in your own family. And if you're listening tonight, tell me where you're watching from and what time it is there. I read every comment because sometimes strangers understand our pain better than family does. And if stories like this touch your heart, I hope you'll subscribe and stay with me for the rest of this journey. Before all of this happened, before the lies and the humiliation and the terrible moment I stood in front of a ballroom full of strangers to expose my own son, my life was quiet. Not exciting, not glamorous, just quiet. And at 67 years old, quiet was all I wanted. I lived alone in the same little brick house in Naperville, Illinois, where my husband Richard and I had raised Ethan. The paint around the porch railings had started peeling years ago, and the kitchen floor creaked near the refrigerator no matter how many times Richard tried fixing it before he passed away. But that house carried 40 years of memories inside its walls. I could still picture Ethan at 8 years old running through the hallway in sock feet after school. I could still hear Richard laughing in the backyard every 4th of July while burning hamburgers on the grill because he always got distracted talking to the neighbors. Some mornings when the sunlight hit the kitchen window just right, I could almost convince myself they were both still there. Richard died 5 years ago after a heart attack that came without warning. One minute, he was complaining about chest pressure while shoveling snow, and the next, I was sitting in a freezing emergency room holding his wedding ring in my palm while a doctor apologized to me. People tell you grief gets easier. I don't think that's true. I think you just learn how to carry it without collapsing in public. After Richard passed, my world became smaller. I retired from nursing 2 years later because my knees couldn't handle 12-hour shifts anymore. I spent 36 years working at Edward Hospital. Night shifts, holidays, double shifts during flu season. I held strangers' hands while they died. I comforted families. I missed birthdays and anniversaries because patients needed me. I wasn't rich, but Richard and I had been careful. Every extra dollar went into savings or retirement accounts. Richard always said, "Vanessa, I don't want you struggling when we're old." He used to joke that one day we'd drive to Maine together and rent a little cabin near the water. He wanted to sit by the ocean and eat lobster rolls like tourists. We never made it there. After he died, I kept the dream tucked away quietly in my heart. Maybe someday, I thought. Maybe if my health stayed good. Maybe if life stayed calm. Most days, my routine was simple. I watered my flowers in the mornings. I attended church every Sunday. I baked too much banana bread and gave half of it away to neighbors. Sometimes I watched old movies alone with a blanket over my legs while snow fell outside the windows. Loneliness became something familiar. Not painful exactly, just heavy. That's probably why Ethan's attention meant so much to me. My son became more involved in my life after Richard died. At first, it felt like love, real love. The kind every mother hopes she raised her child to give. He started visiting every weekend. Sometimes he brought groceries. Sometimes he fixed little things around the house without me asking. He replaced the porch light one month and repaired the garbage disposal another month. Dad would kill me if I let this place fall apart, he said once with a smile. I remember how proud I felt hearing that. Ethan had always been intelligent. Even as a boy, he was organized and disciplined in ways other kids weren't. While his friends played video games, Ethan talked about business and investments before he was even old enough to drive. Richard used to say, "That boy's going places." And he did. By 42, Ethan was already a senior financial executive in Chicago. He wore expensive suits and traveled for conferences and knew words I barely understood when he talked about markets and portfolios and acquisitions. I didn't always follow what he said, but I loved hearing him talk. Because every mother likes believing her child turned out well. His wife, Claire, was polished in a way I never learned to be. She always looked elegant, even when casually stopping by the house. Perfect hair, perfect makeup, perfect smile. Sometimes I felt shabby standing next to her in my old sweaters, but she was always polite to me in those days. "Vanessa, you raised such an incredible man," she would say while sipping coffee at my kitchen table. And I believed her. God help me, I believed all of it. Their daughter Olivia was the light of my life. She had Ethan's eyes, but Richard's kindness. Whenever she visited, the house felt alive again. One afternoon, while Olivia was upstairs painting at my dining room table, Ethan sat beside me on the back porch. "You know," he said casually, "you shouldn't be handling all your finances alone anymore." I laughed softly. "I pay my bills just fine." "I know you do," he said quickly. "I'm just saying, scammers target seniors all the time now. You work too hard for that retirement money." I remember feeling touched by his concern. He continued carefully. "You know, I could help manage things for you if you wanted. Just keep an eye on everything." I waved him off at first, but Ethan kept bringing it up over the next few months. Not aggressively, gently, patiently, like a loving son trying to protect his mother. He'd sit at my kitchen table with his laptop open, showing me charts and numbers that made my head spin. "You're losing money leaving it sitting there," he explained one evening. "Inflation alone is eating into your savings." I nodded, even though I only understood half of what he meant. Then Claire started joining the conversations too. "Honestly, Vanessa," she said one night, "you're lucky to have someone in finance helping you. Most people your age get completely taken advantage of." Something about the way she said "your age" made my stomach tighten slightly. But I ignored it, because I trusted them. Why wouldn't I? Ethan was my son. The little boy who once cried himself sick after accidentally breaking my favorite coffee mug at age 9. The teenager who stayed awake beside my hospital bed when I had pneumonia years ago. The man who held my hand at Richard's funeral while I fell apart. That man would never hurt me. At least, that's what I believed then. And looking back now, I think that was the exact moment everything started to fall apart. At first, Ethan only helped with small things. Online bill payments, bank passwords, insurance paperwork I didn't fully understand. The kinds of things adult children often help their aging parents with. Looking back now, I realize that's why I ignored the warning signs for so long. Nothing happened all at once. It happened slowly, carefully, like someone quietly removing bricks from the foundation of your home one by one, while you continue living inside it, unaware the collapse has already begun. One rainy Tuesday afternoon, Ethan came over carrying takeout containers from my favorite Italian restaurant. "You don't cook enough anymore," he scolded gently while unpacking the food into plates. "You're losing weight." "I'm old," I teased. "You're stubborn," he corrected with a smile. We ate together in the kitchen while rain tapped softly against the windows. For a moment, I felt happy in a way I hadn't felt since Richard died. Then, Ethan opened his laptop. "I've been reviewing your retirement accounts again," he said casually. I sighed dramatically. "You and those spreadsheets." I'm serious, Mom. He leaned closer. You're leaving too much money sitting untouched. I'm not trying to get rich at 67. That's not the point. He turned the screen toward me. Charts and graphs filled the display. You need better asset management, he explained. Safer diversification? Tax protection? I stared at the numbers helplessly. Financial language always sounded like another country to me. Ethan noticed my confusion and softened his voice. That's exactly why I worry, he said. You trust people too easily. Something about hearing that from my own son made me emotional. After Richard died, I constantly feared becoming vulnerable. The world suddenly felt full of stories about elderly people being tricked or manipulated. Ethan knew that. And maybe that's why his concern worked so well on me. I just don't want anyone taking advantage of you, he continued quietly. I reached over and squeezed his hand. You're a good son. For a second, something strange crossed his face. Not guilt exactly, more like discomfort, but it disappeared so quickly, I questioned whether I imagined it. A few days later, Claire visited while Ethan was still at work. She arrived wearing a cream-colored coat that probably cost more than my monthly grocery budget. Vanessa, your roses are gorgeous, she said while stepping inside. Claire always complimented something before asking for anything. It took me a long time to notice that pattern. I made coffee while she sat at the kitchen table scrolling through her phone. You know, she said casually, Ethan worries about you constantly. I smiled faintly. He worries too much. Well, you are alone now. The sentence hit harder than she probably intended. Or maybe exactly as hard as she intended. I looked down at my coffee cup. Claire continued, honestly, it's dangerous for seniors to manage complicated finances by themselves nowadays. There it was again. Seniors, your age, alone. Words that slowly chip away at your confidence without you noticing. I manage fine, I said gently. Oh, I know, Claire replied quickly. I just mean Ethan's expertise is such a blessing. Most people would kill to have free financial advice from someone at his level. She smiled warmly, but something cold sat underneath it. I couldn't explain why. That evening, Ethan called me. Claire said you seemed upset earlier. I wasn't upset. She worries you think we're interfering. I leaned back in my chair with a tired sigh. I just don't like feeling old, Ethan. His voice softened immediately. You're not old to me? That almost made me cry. Grief does strange things to people. After Richard died, I became desperate to feel needed, connected, safe. And Ethan knew exactly how to give me those feelings. Over the next several weeks, he became even more involved in my finances. He helped me set up new online banking features. He organized my passwords. He moved papers into folders labeled with sticky notes because, according to him, everything needs structure. Sometimes he spoke so confidently that I felt foolish questioning him. One Saturday afternoon, he placed a stack of documents in front of me. Just some authorization forms, he said. Nothing major. I adjusted my reading glasses. That's a lot of pages. It's standard stuff. He flipped quickly through the documents, pointing where I needed to sign. Here and here. One more there. I signed because I trusted him, because he was my son, because I was tired, because the tiny print blurred together, because people who love you aren't supposed to trick you. At one point, I asked, what exactly am I signing again? Mostly access permissions in case of emergencies, he answered immediately. If something happens medically, I can handle things for you. That sounded responsible, safe, loving. I signed every page. Now, I sometimes lie awake at night remembering that moment. The sound of my pen scratching against paper. The calm expression on Ethan's face. The way he avoided looking directly at me. A week later, Ethan insisted on taking over my monthly bill payments completely. You shouldn't stress about due dates, he said. I've paid bills for 40 years, and now you don't have to. At first, it felt relieving. I stopped worrying about passwords and online accounts. Ethan said he'd monitor everything carefully. And honestly, part of me enjoyed being taken care of. After spending most of my life caring for everyone else, there was comfort in believing someone wanted to protect me. But slowly, little things began changing. When I asked about account balances, Ethan gave vague answers. When bank statements arrived, he started taking them directly from the mailbox to organize them. Once I noticed him quickly minimizing something on his laptop when I entered the room. What was that, I asked? Work stuff. His answer came too fast. Another time, I overheard Claire speaking sharply to him in the hallway during Olivia's birthday dinner. We can't keep bleeding money like this, she hissed. Then silence. When they returned to the dining room, both were smiling again. I told myself every marriage had stress. Every family had private conversations. Still, an uncomfortable feeling began growing quietly inside me. Not suspicion exactly. More like instability. Like walking across ice that hasn't cracked yet, but no longer feels solid beneath your feet. Then one evening, Ethan sat beside me on the couch while I watched television. You should really consider updating your estate plans too, he said casually. I muted the TV, my estate plans, just to simplify things later. I laughed nervously. Hopefully later is a long way away. Of course, he said quickly. I'm just thinking ahead. Then he added something that stayed with me long after he left. You have to be realistic at this stage of life, Mom. At this stage of life. I remember sitting alone afterward in the quiet house, staring at Richard's photograph above the fireplace. For the first time in months, something deep inside me whispered a terrible question. Why did my son suddenly seem so interested in preparing for a future without me in it? The first real crack appeared on a cold Thursday morning in February. I remember the date because it was exactly 3 days before Richard's birthday. I had driven to the pharmacy after a doctor's appointment to pick up my blood pressure medication. The pharmacist, a young man named Tyler, who had worked there for years, greeted me kindly as usual. How are you doing today, Mrs. Webb? Oh, still breathing, I joked. He smiled politely and scanned my prescription bag. Then his expression changed. He frowned at the screen. Something about that tiny sound made my stomach tighten. What is it? I asked. 1 second. He typed again, then again. Behind me, the line at the counter started growing longer. I could feel people waiting impatiently. Finally, Tyler looked up awkwardly. It says, your card was declined? I blinked at him. That can't be right. I'm sorry. There has to be a mistake. I handed him another card with trembling fingers. Declined again. Heat flooded my face instantly. I became painfully aware of the people behind me pretending not to listen while clearly listening to everything. Tyler lowered his voice sympathetically. Do you have another form of payment I did? But the humiliation still burned through me. I paid cash and walked back to my car, fighting tears the entire way. I sat behind the steering wheel, gripping the pharmacy bag in my lap, while snow drifted softly across the parking lot. Something felt wrong, deeply wrong. I pulled out my phone and called the bank immediately. After several minutes navigating automated menus, a woman named Denise finally answered. Ma'am, she said carefully after verifying my identity, there have been several substantial transfers from your checking and retirement-linked accounts recently. My heart started pounding. What transfers she listed, amounts that made my blood run cold. $10,000, $15,000, $8,000, another $12,000. Some were marked as investment reallocations. Others appeared as wire transfers. I didn't authorize those, I whispered. There was silence on the line. Well, Denise said slowly, the transactions were approved through authorized access permissions connected to your account. Authorized access. I barely understood what that meant. My hands shook so badly I almost dropped the phone. I need to speak to my son, I said suddenly, mostly to myself. Would you like us to freeze the account activity temporarily? Denise asked. I hesitated. That hesitation changed everything. Because even then, even with fear crawling up my spine, part of me still trusted Ethan more than my own instincts. No, I said quietly. Not yet. I hung up and immediately called him. He answered on the second ring. Hey, Mom. His voice sounded normal, relaxed. That somehow made my fear worse. Ethan. My throat tightened. The pharmacy said my card was declined. There was a tiny pause. So the bank says there were large transfers from my accounts. Another pause. Then Ethan sighed heavily. Oh God, Mom, you scared me. What? That's what this is about. My confusion deepened. You know about the transfers. Of course I know about them. I handled them. I gripped the steering wheel harder. You never told me. Yes, I did. No, Ethan, you didn't. He exhaled slowly, sounding irritated now. Mom, we discussed restructuring your accounts weeks ago. I thought you meant paperwork? It is paperwork. That's not what the bank said. His tone sharpened slightly. Because bank employees don't understand long-term asset management. The words came fast and smooth, almost rehearsed. It's temporary movement to protect your retirement funds from tax exposure and inflation losses. You're overreacting. Overreacting. I hated that word immediately. I just don't understand why my card was declined. That's probably a processing delay. A delay? Yes. How long, I don't know, Mom. Something in his voice felt different now. Not loving. Not patient. Tense. Like I was becoming inconvenient. Do not call the bank again until I look into this, he said firmly. I blinked in surprise. Why? Because they'll flag unnecessary activity and complicate things. But it's my account. I know that, he snapped. Silence fell between us. Then his tone softened instantly, almost unnaturally fast. Look, I'll come by tonight and explain everything. Okay, I agreed, because I didn't know what else to do. That evening, Ethan arrived alone. No Claire, no Olivia, just Ethan in an expensive charcoal coat carrying his laptop bag. The moment he walked inside, he headed straight for my kitchen table, like a man arriving at a business meeting instead of his mother's house. You're panicking over nothing, he said while opening his computer. I stood near the counter watching him. Then explain it to me. I already did. No, you used words I don't understand. He rubbed his forehead impatiently. I moved portions of your money into better performing positions temporarily. Positions, investments. You invested my retirement money. Mom, stop saying it like that. Like what? Like I stole it. The word hit the room hard. Stole. Neither of us moved for a second. Then Ethan leaned back in his chair and forced a small laugh. Jesus, Mom. You really think I'd steal from you? I wanted to say no immediately, but something stopped me. Maybe it was the irritation in his eyes. Maybe it was how defensive he sounded. Or maybe it was because, for the first time in my life, my son felt like a stranger sitting in my kitchen. I don't know what to think, I admitted quietly. His expression changed instantly. Hurt, offended, manipulated. All I've done is help you. I know. You'd be completely lost handling these things yourself. That sentence stung more than I expected. I handled my life before you were born, I said softly. He stood abruptly. That's not fair. What isn't fair? The way you're treating me right now. Treating him? I stared at him in disbelief. I was humiliated at a pharmacy today, and I said I'd fix it. You should have warned me. I didn't think you'd understand the technical details. Again, that same implication. Too old, too confused, too incapable. Ethan closed his laptop sharply. Honestly, Mom, this is exactly why I worried about you managing things alone. I folded my arms tightly across my chest. What does that mean? It means you get emotional instead of logical. There was something cold in his face now. Something I had never seen before. Then suddenly, he seemed to realize he'd gone too far. He softened his voice again. Look, he said quietly, I'm trying to protect you. I wanted desperately to believe him. Desperately. But fear had already entered the room, and once fear enters a family, it never leaves quietly. Ethan stayed another hour pretending to explain investments while my mind spun in circles. Before leaving, he gathered several envelopes from my counter. I'll organize these too. I almost told him no. Almost. But old habits are hard to break, especially the habit of trusting your child. After he left, I stood at the living room window watching snow fall across the street. About 10 minutes later, I realized Ethan had forgotten his phone charger. I grabbed it and stepped outside quickly. His car was still parked near the curb. As I approached, I heard his voice through the partially open driver's side window. She still trusts me, he said sharply into the phone. A pause. Then, don't panic yet. I froze. Every hair on my arm stood up. I couldn't hear the person speaking on the other end. But I heard Ethan clearly. And in that moment, for the very first time, I felt truly afraid of my own son. For 3 days after overhearing Ethan in the car, I barely slept. Every sound inside the house seemed louder than usual. The refrigerator humming in the kitchen, the heater turning on at night, the branches scraping against my bedroom window whenever the wind picked up. Fear changes ordinary things. It turns silence into something threatening. I kept replaying Ethan's voice in my mind. She still trusts me. Not Mom. Not Vanessa. She, cold, detached. Like I wasn't a person anymore. Like I was a problem being managed. The next morning, I almost called him to apologize. That's the part people don't understand when family betrays you. Your first instinct isn't anger, it's denial. You search desperately for another explanation because accepting the truth feels unbearable. I wanted to believe I had misunderstood. Maybe he was talking about something else. Maybe I was overreacting. Maybe grief and age really were affecting my judgment. That thought terrified me most of all, because once someone makes you question your own mind, you begin doubting everything. I spent the next few days moving through life in a strange fog. I smiled at neighbors. I attended church. I baked cornbread for a community fundraiser. Outwardly, nothing looked different. Inside, I felt like the floor beneath me was rotting. Then the envelope arrived. It came on a gray Monday afternoon, mixed in with grocery coupons and advertisements. At first glance, it looked ordinary, just another financial statement. But the return address caught my attention immediately. Harbor Crest Capital Management. I frowned. I didn't recognize the company. I carried the envelope inside and sat at the kitchen table beneath the same hanging light Richard installed years earlier. My hands already felt shaky before I even opened it. Inside was a quarterly financial summary. I stared at the numbers for several seconds before my brain fully understood what I was seeing. Withdrawal $48,000. Transfer $32,000. Asset movement $76,000. Additional linked account transfer $41,500. My breathing turned shallow. I flipped through the pages faster. At the top corner of several documents was the name of the receiving entity, Webb Strategic Holdings, LLC. My son's company. I felt physically sick. Actually sick. The room tilted slightly around me. No, I whispered aloud. I grabbed my reading glasses again, convinced I had misunderstood something. But the numbers stayed the same. Nearly $200,000 had disappeared from my retirement accounts. My retirement. Mine and Richard's entire safety net. Gone. I don't remember standing up from the table. I only remember suddenly being in the bathroom, vomiting into the sink, while tears streamed down my face. My knees hurt as I sank to the floor. I stayed there for a long time, not crying loudly, just sitting in stunned silence. There's a particular kind of pain that comes when betrayal finally becomes undeniable. It's not dramatic at first. It's hollow. Like your body no longer knows how to function because the person who hurt you is the same person you love. Eventually, I forced myself back to the kitchen table and called the bank again. This time, I asked more direct questions. A different representative answered. His name was Michael. "Mrs. Webb," he said carefully after reviewing the account. "The transfers appear authorized through an active power of attorney agreement." My stomach dropped. What power of attorney? The documentation filed several months ago. I never filed power of attorney. There was silence. Then typing. Well, according to our records, the authorization grants Ethan Webb financial authority connected to these accounts. I gripped the edge of the table so hard my fingers cramped. "No," I whispered. No, that's impossible. Would you like us to send copies of the documentation?" "Yes." My voice cracked badly. "Yes, please." When the email arrived 20 minutes later, I opened the attachment with trembling hands. There it was, my signature, or something close enough to fool people. The document granted Ethan broad financial control over portions of my accounts. I stared at the signature until my vision blurred. Had I signed this? I honestly didn't know. That terrified me even more. Then slowly, memory returned. Stacks of paperwork. Ethan flipping pages quickly. Just routine authorization forms. I covered my mouth as realization hit me. Dear God, he had buried it inside all those papers I signed without reading carefully. My chest tightened painfully. Then I noticed another signature at the bottom. Witness Claire Webb. I leaned back in my chair, feeling completely numb. Claire knew, not suspected. Knew. The polished smiles, the fake concern, the constant reminders about my age. It had all been part of this. I suddenly remembered something Claire once said while helping me clean after Thanksgiving dinner. "You're lucky Ethan is willing to handle things now, before everything becomes complicated later." At the time, I thought she meant aging. Now I realized she meant control. My hands shook violently as I continued reading the documents. Several transfers had occurred on dates I barely remembered. Then one date stopped me cold. September 18th. I knew that date instantly. That was the day I had fallen down my basement stairs. I spent 11 hours in the emergency room with a concussion and stitches above my eye. There was no possible way I had approved financial transfers that day. No possible way. A cold wave of horror moved through my body. Ethan hadn't simply manipulated me. He had been actively using moments when I was vulnerable, possibly incapacitated. I suddenly remembered waking up groggy after my hospital visit and seeing Ethan sitting beside my bed holding paperwork. At the time, I assumed they were insurance forms. I had signed wherever he pointed because my head hurt too badly to focus. "Oh my God," I whispered. The realization hit so hard, I started crying again. Not graceful tears, broken ones. The kind that leave you gasping for air. I kept thinking about Richard, about how hard he worked, how many birthdays he missed working overtime at the fire department, how proud he was that we'd built financial security together, and our own son had taken it. That evening, Ethan called casually, as if nothing had happened. "Hey, Mom." I couldn't speak for a second. "You okay?" His voice sounded normal, warm even. The contrast nearly destroyed me. "I got a statement in the mail," I said quietly. Silence. "Then what statement? From Harbor Crest?" Another silence. "Longer this time. You weren't supposed to get that copy." The sentence slipped out before he could stop himself. I closed my eyes slowly. There it was. Truth. Ugly and undeniable. "Ethan," I whispered, "how much money did you take from me?" His tone changed instantly. Defensive. Sharp. "Don't say it like that. Answer me." "It wasn't stealing. How much you're overreacting." "How much?" Finally, he snapped. "It was an investment." I flinched at the anger in his voice. "You used my retirement money without telling me. I was trying to grow it. You lied to me. I was going to replace it before you noticed." Before you noticed. Not before asking permission. Not before explaining. Before I noticed. That distinction shattered something inside me forever. Then came the sentence, "I will never forget as long as I live." You don't even understand how these things work, Mom. Not concern, not guilt. Contempt. Like I was stupid. Like I should be grateful he stole from me professionally. And in that moment, sitting alone in my kitchen, while snow fell outside the windows Richard once painted, I realized something devastating. My son no longer saw me as his mother. He saw me as an asset. I invited Ethan and Claire over the following Sunday, not because I felt calm, not because I knew what to do, but because part of me still hoped there was some explanation that could save my son from becoming the man I feared he had become. I spent the entire morning cleaning the house, even though nobody notices a clean house during a family crisis. I vacuumed the living room, wiped down kitchen counters, folded blankets already folded. Grief and fear make people do strange things with their hands. By noon, my stomach hurt so badly I could barely eat. At one point, I stood in front of Richard's photograph near the fireplace and whispered, "I don't know how to do this." The silence afterward felt unbearable. Ethan and Claire arrived exactly at 1 o'clock. Of course they did. Ethan had always been punctual. Claire entered first carrying a lemon pie from a bakery downtown, as if we were attending a normal Sunday lunch. "Vanessa," she said warmly, leaning in for a quick hug. "You look tired." I stared at her for a moment too long. Did she hear herself? Of course I looked tired. My son and daughter-in-law had drained nearly $200,000 from my retirement accounts. Ethan stepped inside behind her. "Hey, Mom." He sounded cautious, measured, like someone approaching a nervous animal. I noticed immediately that he wasn't making direct eye contact. That hurt more than anger would have. We sat around the kitchen table where hundreds of ordinary family conversations had happened over the years. Birthday dinners, Christmas planning, Olivia coloring pictures while Richard told old firehouse stories. Now the room felt cold, foreign. Claire folded her hands politely. "So," she said softly, "Ethan said you've been upset." Upset. I almost laughed. Instead, I reached into the folder beside me and slowly slid the financial statements across the table. "I want the truth." The room went completely still. Ethan barely glanced at the papers. Claire's expression tightened for only a second before smoothing out again. "What exactly are you accusing us of?" she asked carefully. Us? Interesting. I'm not accusing anyone, I said quietly. I'm asking my son why almost $200,000 disappeared from my retirement accounts. Ethan leaned back in his chair with a frustrated sigh. Mom, we've already discussed this. No. You explained investments. You never explained why my money ended up in your company account. His jaw tightened. It was temporary. How temporary silence. I looked directly at him. How much of it is left? That question landed hard. For the first time, Ethan looked nervous. Real nervous. Claire immediately jumped in. Vanessa, I think everyone's emotions are escalating right now. I turned toward her slowly. My husband worked 38 years in the Chicago Fire Department. I worked 36 years as a nurse. That money was supposed to carry me through the last years of my life. Claire swallowed, but stayed silent. I looked back at Ethan. Where is it? Finally, he exploded. It's not gone. His voice echoed through the kitchen. I flinched instinctively. He immediately lowered his tone again. Mom? Please stop acting like I robbed you. Then explain why you transferred my retirement savings into your business account. Because I had an opportunity. The honesty of that answer stunned me. No apology, no shame, just justification. What kind of opportunity a short-term investment project? With my money, with borrowed capital. It was not yours to borrow. Claire sighed dramatically and rubbed her temples. Vanessa, you're looking at this emotionally instead of financially. I stared at her in disbelief. Emotionally, I felt something inside me harden for the first time. My husband is dead, I said quietly. That money was all the security I had left. Ethan leaned forward urgently, and I was trying to grow it. You gambled it. It wasn't gambling, then why hide it? His face darkened instantly. Because I knew you wouldn't understand. That sentence cut deeper than almost anything else. Not because it was cruel, because it was arrogant. He genuinely believed his intelligence gave him permission to control me. I'm your mother, I whispered, and I'm the one who understands finance. There it was again, that contempt, that impatience. Like my age had erased my right to basic respect. Claire reached over and touched Ethan's arm gently. Calm down. No, he snapped. I'm tired of being treated like some criminal after everything I've done for her. For her. Not with her. Not helping her. Managing her. I looked at the expensive watch on his wrist. The tailored coat hanging near the doorway. The luxury SUV parked outside my little house. And suddenly, pieces started fitting together in my mind. How bad are your debts? I asked quietly. Silence. Ethan looked away. Claire answered too quickly. We're fine. That meant they weren't. I had spent decades around patients and grieving families. You learn how to recognize panic hiding behind composure. How bad, I repeated. Ethan stood abruptly from the table. You have no idea how much pressure I'm under. I blinked at him. Pressure. He started pacing the kitchen. You think success just happens? You think people in my position can afford mistakes? You used my retirement money because you wanted to look successful. It wasn't supposed to turn out like this. Finally, truth. Ugly, desperate truth. I felt tears burning my eyes. How much did you lose? He stopped moving. Then quietly, most of it. The room tilted around me. Claire spoke immediately. It's not lost permanently. How much, I whispered again. Ethan rubbed both hands over his face. About 140,000. I physically gasped. My chest hurt so sharply, I thought something might actually be wrong with my heart. Claire leaned forward quickly. Vanessa listened to me carefully. Ethan fully intended to recover everything. You spent my retirement. It was an investment strategy. You bought a new car that has nothing to do with this. You renovated your kitchen that's completely separate. I looked at Ethan. You used my money to finance your life. His silence answered me, and suddenly, every little detail from the past year replayed differently in my mind. The luxury vacations, Claire's designer handbags, the expensive wine at dinner, the constant pressure to appear successful. It had all been built partly on my stolen future. I started crying then, not loudly, just quiet broken tears sliding down my face. Ethan looked uncomfortable, more than remorseful. That realization devastated me. You could have asked me, I whispered. He frowned. What if you were in trouble? If you were drowning financially? You could have come to me. You didn't understand the scale of it. That's not the point. My voice cracked badly. You lied to me. For a moment, guilt finally appeared in his eyes. Then it vanished again, behind frustration. You're acting like I'm some monster. I stared at him for a long time, then softly asked the question I had been terrified to say aloud. Did you ever plan to tell me the truth? Neither Ethan nor Claire answered, and that silence told me everything. I stood slowly from the table. I think you should leave. Ethan's face hardened immediately. Mom number Claire rose too. Vanessa threatening family over financial misunderstandings is dangerous. Misunderstandings. I almost laughed again. Then Ethan said the sentence that changed everything forever. If you start making irrational accusations publicly, he said carefully, people may start questioning whether you're mentally well enough to manage your affairs alone. The room went silent. I felt every ounce of blood drain from my face. He had threatened me, not directly, but clearly enough. Claire looked uncomfortable for the first time. Ethan. But he kept going. I'm serious, Mom. Emotional instability at your age can create legal complications. At your age. There it was again. Old, confused, unstable. A woman whose voice could be dismissed. And in that moment, staring at my own son across the kitchen table Richard built with his own hands, I realized something horrifying. Ethan wasn't just willing to steal from me, he was willing to erase me. For 2 full days after Ethan threatened me, I barely moved from the couch. I turned off my phone, closed the curtains, ignored the dishes piling in the sink. The house felt darker somehow, even during daylight. Not physically dark, emotionally dark, like something poisonous had settled into the walls. I kept replaying his words over and over in my head. People may start questioning whether you're mentally well enough. I had spent most of my life caring for vulnerable people. As a nurse, I had seen elderly patients dismissed, ignored, manipulated, and spoken over by their own families. And now my own son was using that exact fear against me. I couldn't stop shaking, not from anger, from humiliation. Because part of me had actually believed him for a moment. That's what manipulation does. It makes you question your own reality until you no longer trust your thoughts. I started wondering ridiculous things. Had I become forgetful lately? Had I signed more documents than I remembered? Was I overreacting emotionally? Every time those thoughts entered my head, I hated myself for them. On Wednesday morning, my best friend Diane Carter knocked on my front door. I almost didn't answer. But Diane wasn't the type of woman who accepted silence politely. She knocked again. Then a third time. Vanessa, she called through the door, either open this door or I'm using the emergency key you gave me 10 years ago. Despite everything, I almost smiled. I opened the door slowly. The second Diane saw my face, her expression changed. Oh, honey. That was all it took. I burst into tears immediately. Diane pulled me into her arms right there in the doorway, while I cried harder than I had cried even at Richard's funeral. Because grief is easier than betrayal. Death is cruel, but betrayal feels personal. Diane guided me to the couch and wrapped a blanket around my shoulders like I was one of her children instead of a 68-year-old woman falling apart in her living room. "What happened?" she asked softly. At first, I could barely speak. Then everything came pouring out. The missing money, the paperwork, the threats, the hospital documents, Claire's involvement, Ethan implying I was mentally unstable. Diane listened without interrupting once. That's one thing I've always loved about her. She doesn't rush pain. When I finally finished, silence filled the room for several seconds. Then Diane asked quietly, "Do you know what this is called?" I wiped my eyes weakly. "A nightmare." "No." Her voice sharpened. "Financial elder abuse." The words landed heavily. Abuse. I hated hearing my life described that way. "That sounds dramatic," I whispered. "No, Vanessa. What's dramatic is stealing retirement money from your widowed mother and threatening to declare her mentally incompetent." I stared at the floor. Saying it that directly somehow made everything feel even more real. Diane had spent nearly 20 years working as a legal secretary before retiring. She wasn't emotional in a crisis. She became focused, sharp, dangerously calm. "Do you still have all the paperwork?" "Yes." "Good." "Diane?" My voice shook. "I don't want Ethan arrested." She looked at me carefully. "That may not be your choice anymore." I immediately started crying again. "He's still my son." "I know. What kind of mother destroys her own child?" Diane leaned closer. What kind of son destroys his mother's future? That question silenced me completely. Because deep down, beneath all the fear and heartbreak and denial, I already knew the answer. Diane spent the next 3 hours helping me organize every document connected to my finances. We spread papers across the dining room table like detectives building a criminal case. Bank statements, transfer records, signed forms, hospital paperwork, printed emails. As we worked, Diane pointed out details I had missed entirely. "Look at these dates," she said. I leaned closer. Several large transactions had occurred within days of my hospitalization after falling down the basement stairs. One transfer happened while I was literally in the emergency room. "Oh my God," I whispered again. Diane's expression hardened. "He knew you were vulnerable." I covered my mouth with trembling fingers. "No?" "Yes. I raised him better than this." "I know you did. That almost hurt more." Because Diane wasn't insulting my motherhood. She was acknowledging that Ethan had chosen this willingly. Around 4 in the afternoon, Diane sat back in her chair and folded her arms. "You need an attorney." The word made panic rush through me immediately. "No. Yes, I can't take my son to court. You may already be in a legal situation whether you like it or not." I shook my head desperately. This will destroy the family. Diane looked at me sadly. "Vanessa, your family is already being destroyed." I wish she hadn't been right, but she was. The next morning, Diane drove me downtown to meet a lawyer named Rebecca Lawson. I almost canceled 3 separate times on the way there. What if this is all a misunderstanding? Diane gripped the steering wheel tighter. "Vanessa, what if a stranger did this to you? Would you still call it a misunderstanding?" "No, I wouldn't." Rebecca Lawson's office overlooked the Chicago River. She was in her early 50s, with silver-streaked dark hair and the kind of calm confidence that immediately made people tell her the truth. After hearing my story, she became very quiet. Then she asked one question. "Does your son work in financial management?" "Yes." Rebecca slowly removed her glasses. "That complicates things significantly." My stomach tightened again. "How?" "Because he understands fiduciary responsibility. Which means a prosecutor could argue he knew exactly what he was doing." Prosecutor. The word made me physically nauseous. Rebecca reviewed the documents for nearly an hour while Diane and I sat silently across from her desk. Finally, she looked up. "Mrs. Webb, I'm going to be honest with you." I braced myself. This appears to be a very serious case of financial exploitation. Hearing it from a professional made the room feel colder. Rebecca continued carefully. "The power of attorney may technically exist, but that doesn't automatically legalize misuse of funds." "I signed papers," I whispered weakly. "You signed papers under trust," Rebecca corrected firmly. "That matters." Then she pointed to one transaction. "What happened on September 18th, I swallowed hard. I fell down my basement stairs. Were you medicated?" "Yes." "Concussed?" "Yes." Rebecca nodded slowly. "And this transfer occurred during your emergency room admission." Diane muttered softly under her breath. Rebecca's eyes sharpened. "This is important." My hands started shaking again. "You really think he used that moment intentionally?" Rebecca didn't answer immediately. Instead, she asked another question. "Has your son ever suggested you're mentally incompetent?" I looked down at my lap. "Yes." That answer seemed to anger her more than anything else I'd said. "Classic coercive strategy," she said quietly. I stared at her. "Strategy, yes. Undermine the victim's confidence, establish dependency, gain control, isolate financially. Victim." Another word I hated, but this time I didn't argue, because deep inside I was beginning to understand something terrifying. This hadn't been one terrible decision. It had been a process. Planned, gradual, intentional. Rebecca closed the file carefully. "You need to stop communicating with your son alone immediately." Tears filled my eyes again. "I don't know how my life became this." Rebecca's expression softened slightly. "Mrs. Webb, people like your son count on shame keeping mothers silent. I thought about that all the way home, because she was right. The shame was crushing me. Not just because Ethan stole from me, but because some part of me still wanted to protect him from the consequences. And that was exactly why he thought he could get away with it. 3 weeks after meeting Rebecca Lawson, I received the invitation that changed everything. It arrived in a thick ivory envelope with gold lettering across the front. At first, I thought it was a wedding invitation, something elegant, something joyful. Instead, it was for Ethan's promotion ceremony. Vice President of Finance, Grand Lakes Financial Group. The event would be held at the Blackstone Hotel in downtown Chicago. Formal attire required. Guests encouraged to attend with family. I sat at the kitchen table staring at the invitation while snow drifted outside the windows. My son was about to be celebrated publicly for integrity and leadership, while secretly stealing from his widowed mother. The cruelty of that almost felt unreal. A small, handwritten note had been added at the bottom. "Mom, it would mean a lot if you were there. Olivia keeps asking if Grandma is coming. Let's please move forward. Love, Ethan." Move forward. As if we'd argued over politics at Thanksgiving instead of financial betrayal. I read the note 5 times. Each time my anger mixed more painfully with grief. Because even after everything, part of me still wanted to believe the little boy I raised existed somewhere inside that man. That afternoon, Claire called me. Her voice sounded sweet and polished as always. "Vanessa, did you get the invitation?" "Yes, we really hope you'll come." I stayed silent. Claire continued carefully. "This promotion is a huge moment for Ethan." I almost laughed. Huge moment, of course it was. That promotion came with prestige bonuses, stock options, and social status, the exact things Ethan had become obsessed with. And now I wondered how much of that image had been funded by my retirement money. "Olivia would be heartbroken if you didn't attend," Claire added softly. There it was. Manipulation wrapped in guilt. I closed my eyes briefly. "How is Olivia?" I asked quietly. "She's fine." Claire hesitated. "She misses you." That hurt, because I missed her too. I missed family dinners and movie nights and hearing her laugh upstairs while painting at my dining room table. I missed my old life. "I need time to think," I said. "Vanessa." Claire lowered her voice. Dragging this situation out publicly could hurt everyone. There it was again. Not apology, damage control. "You mean hurt Ethan?" I replied. Silence. Then Claire sighed softly. "You don't understand the pressure he's under." I stared out the kitchen window. "You keep saying that." "Because it's true." "No," I whispered. "I think what's true is that neither of you expected me to fight back." Claire's tone cooled instantly. "That's not fair." "No," I said quietly. "None of this is fair." After hanging up, I sat alone for nearly an hour staring at Richard's photograph above the fireplace. What would he have done? That question haunted me constantly now. Richard believed fiercely in accountability. He loved Ethan deeply, but he never excused dishonesty. I could still hear his voice from years ago after Ethan lied about wrecking a neighbor's mailbox as a teenager. "A mistake can be forgiven," Richard told him then. "A lie destroys trust." Back then, Ethan cried and apologized. Now he manipulated legal documents and threatened my mental competency. How had we gotten here? That evening, I drove to Diane's house with the invitation in my purse. She read it once and muttered, "The nerve of him. I think he wants me there to make everything look normal." Of course he does. I sat heavily on her couch. What if I just don't go? Diane looked at me carefully. "Is that what you want?" "I don't know what I want anymore." And it was true. Part of me wanted to disappear quietly and avoid the humiliation entirely. Another part wanted to scream the truth in the middle of that ballroom. Diane folded the invitation slowly. "Vanessa, do you know what men like Ethan rely on most?" I shook my head. Silence. The word hung heavily between us, because she was right. Everything about this situation depended on my silence. My silence protected Ethan's career. My silence protected Claire's lifestyle. My silence protected the illusion that our family was healthy. Meanwhile, I was the one terrified about paying medical bills someday. The injustice of that started awakening something inside me. Not revenge. Something colder. Clarity. 2 days later, Rebecca called, asking me to come to her office again. When I arrived, she had several files spread across her desk. "I've been reviewing additional financial records," she said carefully. My stomach tightened immediately. "What does that mean?" "It means your son's situation may be more unstable than we initially thought." She slid a document toward me. Several business loans connected to Ethan's company appeared overdue. Credit obligations, investment losses, debt restructuring notices. I stared at the pages in disbelief. "He's drowning financially," I whispered. Rebecca nodded slowly. "That appears likely." Suddenly, everything made horrible sense. The expensive lifestyle, the desperation, the escalating transfers from my accounts. He wasn't investing my money, I realized aloud. He was covering losses. Rebecca didn't answer directly. She didn't need to. Then she said something that chilled me. There's another issue. What your son's company has initiated internal compliance reviews involving unusual financial behavior among senior staff. I blinked. You mean they suspect him? Not specifically yet. But financial executives undergo ethics scrutiny regularly, especially before promotions. A strange numbness spread through me. So while he was stealing from me, he was simultaneously preparing for a promotion based partly on trustworthiness and fiduciary leadership. The hypocrisy almost made me physically ill. Rebecca leaned forward carefully. Mrs. Webb, if this becomes public through legal channels, his company may eventually discover everything anyway. I swallowed hard. I never wanted to destroy my son. I know, but I also can't let him erase what he did. Rebecca studied me quietly. Then she asked the question that changed the direction of everything. What would happen if you told the truth before he had the chance to control the narrative? I stared at her. You mean publicly? I mean honestly. The room felt very still. My heartbeat became loud in my ears. I couldn't stand up in front of people and humiliate him. Rebecca's expression softened. He humiliated you first. That sentence stayed with me all week. Meanwhile, Ethan kept texting me increasingly cheerful messages. Hope you're doing okay, Mom. Olivia made cookies for you. Let's move past this. Can't wait to celebrate together. Each message felt surreal now, like watching someone carefully paint over rot spreading beneath a wall. Then, 4 nights before the promotion ceremony, something happened that pushed me closer to a decision. Olivia accidentally sent me a text clearly meant for someone else. Grandma's still upset about the money. I stared at the message in shock. A second text followed immediately. Dad says she'll calm down after the ceremony. My chest tightened painfully. Then a third message arrived. Please don't tell him I texted you. I sat frozen on my couch holding the phone. Olivia knew. Maybe not everything, but enough. Enough to understand money was involved. Enough to know Ethan expected me to stay quiet until after his promotion. Something inside me finally broke completely then. Not my love for my son. That would always exist. What broke was the illusion that silence would save this family. Because silence had already nearly destroyed me. And for the first time since this nightmare began, I stopped asking myself how to protect Ethan. Instead, I started asking a different question. What would happen if I finally told the truth? The week before Ethan's promotion ceremony felt like living inside a storm that nobody else could see. Outside, life continued normally. People went to work. Neighbors shoveled snow. Church friends sent me casserole recipes and cheerful messages. Meanwhile, I sat at my kitchen table building a case against my own son. Every morning, I woke up hoping I would suddenly know the right thing to do. Every morning, I still felt lost. Rebecca Lawson became the only person speaking to me plainly by then. No false comfort, no denial, just truth. You need to prepare emotionally, she told me during one meeting. Because once this becomes public, there's no putting it back inside the box. I stared at the folders spread across her conference table. Bank transfers, email records, account authorizations, transaction histories, evidence. That word still felt impossible connected to Ethan. Rebecca organized everything carefully. If you decide to confront him publicly, she explained, you must stay calm. Facts matter more than emotion. I don't know if I can stay calm. You can. Her confidence surprised me. Then she said something that stayed with me. People will expect an elderly woman to appear confused and unstable. Ethan is counting on that perception. Don't give him what he expects. That angered me more than I expected, because she was right. The entire foundation of Ethan's manipulation depended on making me seem emotional, forgetful, fragile. A grieving widow too confused to understand finances. And for months, I had almost believed that version of myself too. But slowly, something inside me was changing. Pain was turning into clarity. I started reviewing documents myself every evening at home. Not because I understood finance suddenly, but because I needed to understand how my own son had dismantled my trust piece by piece. I noticed patterns now. The transfers increased whenever Ethan faced financial pressure. Several large withdrawals happened immediately after luxury purchases. A wire transfer occurred 2 days before Ethan and Claire left for a resort vacation in Arizona. Another happened shortly before they remodeled their kitchen. My retirement money had funded marble countertops, while I worried about prescription costs. The cruelty of that sat heavily in my chest. One night around midnight, I found myself standing in the dark kitchen holding Richard's old coffee mug. I hadn't touched it in years. The handle was cracked slightly near the bottom, but I could never throw it away. I stood there crying quietly while snow fell outside. I failed him, I whispered into the empty room. But even as I said it, part of me knew that wasn't true. Parents shape their children, but eventually children make their own choices. And Ethan had made his. The next afternoon, Olivia called me unexpectedly. My heart nearly broke hearing her voice. "Grandma, hi, sweetheart." She sounded nervous, young, too young to be caught inside this mess. "Are you mad at Dad?" I closed my eyes immediately. Children always know more than adults think they do. "I'm hurt," I answered carefully. Silence. Then quietly, Mom and Dad fight about money a lot. My stomach tightened. Olivia continued before I could respond. "I heard Dad yelling one night. He said if this promotion didn't happen, everything would fall apart." I sat down slowly at the kitchen table. "What do you mean, I don't know?" Her voice trembled slightly. "But he's been really stressed." That word again. Stress. Pressure. As if those things justified betrayal. "Olivia," I said gently, "none of this is your fault. I know." But she didn't sound convinced. Then came the sentence that shattered me completely. "I think Dad's scared of you now." Scared of me. Not ashamed. Not sorry. Scared. Because for the first time in his life, I was no longer protecting him. After we hung up, I cried for nearly an hour. Not because I doubted my decision anymore, but because Olivia was becoming collateral damage in a war she never asked to be part of. That evening, Diane came over carrying Chinese takeout neither of us really ate. She watched me push noodles around the plate for several minutes before speaking. "You still want to cancel everything?" It wasn't a question. "Yes." "Why? Because I'm his mother." Diane leaned back in her chair. "And because you're his mother?" He expected silence. I rubbed my forehead tiredly. "You make it sound simple." "It's not simple." She softened slightly. "But Vanessa, you need to understand something." I looked up. "If Ethan gets away with this, he won't stop." The words chilled me. "He already threatened your mental competency once. Imagine what happens when real financial desperation hits again." I hated that she was right. Because deep down, I already knew Ethan's problem wasn't just money anymore. It was entitlement. He believed his success mattered more than my safety. And people who believe that rarely stop voluntarily. 3 days before the ceremony, Rebecca invited me to her office again. This time, another man sat beside her. Mrs. Webb. Rebecca said carefully, "This is Daniel Harper. He works in corporate compliance consulting." The man nodded politely. My anxiety spiked instantly. "Why is he here?" Rebecca folded her hands. "Because we discreetly verified something important." I waited silently. Daniel opened a folder. "Your son's promotion included extensive ethics evaluations," he explained. "Executives at his level are expected to demonstrate exceptional fiduciary responsibility." The irony nearly made me laugh. "He stole from his mother," I whispered. Daniel nodded grimly. "Yes, which means this situation creates serious exposure for both him and the company if discovered later." Rebecca leaned forward slightly. "If the company learns after promoting him, they may argue they were deceived. And they may become far less sympathetic." I stared at them both. For the first time, I fully understood what was really happening. Ethan wasn't simply celebrating a promotion. He was building an image, a polished public identity based on trustworthiness, family values, financial integrity. Meanwhile, behind closed doors, he was exploiting his widowed mother. The hypocrisy suddenly disgusted me so deeply, it overpowered my fear for a moment. Rebecca spoke softly. "You don't have to scream. You don't have to cause a scene. But you do have the right to tell the truth." Truth. Such a simple word. Yet families destroy themselves avoiding it every day. The night before the ceremony, I barely slept. I kept walking through the house, touching familiar objects. Richard's recliner, old family photographs, the hallway wall marked with pencil lines showing Ethan's childhood height over the years. Age 6, age 10, age 15. I pressed my hand against one mark and started crying again. How does a little boy become someone capable of this? I still don't fully know. Around 2 a.m, my phone buzzed beside me. A text from Ethan. "Can't wait to see you tomorrow, Mom. This means everything to us." I stared at the message for a long time. Then another arrived. "I know things have been difficult lately, but tomorrow is a chance to move forward as a family. Move forward, not apologize, not confess, not repair. Simply move past it quietly." I finally understood then. Ethan still believed my love for him would outweigh my love for myself. He believed motherhood meant endless forgiveness without consequences. And maybe for most of his life, he had been right. But sitting alone in the darkness of the house Richard and I built together, I realized something important. Protecting my son from the truth had not saved him. It had helped create the man standing before me now. And for the first time since this nightmare began, I made my decision. I would attend the ceremony, and I would tell the truth. The morning of Ethan's promotion ceremony, I stood in front of my bedroom mirror for nearly 20 minutes, trying to decide what kind of woman I was supposed to be that night. A proud mother, a victim, a witness. I honestly didn't know anymore. The navy blue dress hanging on my closet door was one Richard bought for me years ago before a retirement banquet at the hospital. I hadn't worn it since his funeral. For a moment, I almost put it back. Everything about the evening ahead felt wrong. Unnatural. Mothers aren't supposed to walk into ballrooms carrying evidence against their children. But eventually, I put the dress on anyway. My hands trembled while fastening the small pearl earrings Richard gave me on our 35th anniversary. "You look beautiful," he had told me that night. Standing alone in the mirror now, I barely recognized myself. Older. Tired. Harder somehow. But underneath the exhaustion, there was something else too. Resolve. Diane arrived at my house shortly before 5. The second she saw my face, she softened. "You okay?" "No. Good," she said quietly. "That means you still have a conscience, unlike some people." Despite everything, I smiled faintly. Rebecca met us downtown near the hotel. She carried a slim leather folder containing copies of every document connected to Ethan's theft. "Last chance to walk away," she told me gently before we entered. I stared at the glowing entrance of the Blackstone Hotel. Luxury cars lined the curb outside. Men in tailored suits and women in sparkling dresses stepped through revolving doors, laughing softly beneath chandeliers. Ethan belonged in that world now. Or at least, he thought he did. "I'm not walking away," I said finally. And for the first time since this nightmare began, I realized I meant it completely. Inside, the ballroom looked breathtaking. Crystal chandeliers reflected golden light across white linen tables. A jazz trio played softly near the stage, while waiters carried trays of champagne through the crowd. Everything smelled expensive. Flowers, perfume, polished wood. Success. My chest tightened painfully as I looked around. Richard would have been proud to see Ethan standing there. That thought nearly broke me. Ethan spotted me almost immediately across the room. Relief flashed across his face. Real relief, because until that moment he hadn't been certain I would come. "Mom." He crossed the ballroom quickly toward me, smiling widely enough for nearby executives to notice. Then he hugged me. And for one terrible second, instinct almost made me hug him back like nothing had happened. That's the horrifying thing about loving your child. Even after betrayal, your body still remembers them as someone safe. "You came," he whispered. I stepped back slowly. Yes. He looked handsome that night. Dark tailored tuxedo. Silver tie. Perfectly styled hair. He looked exactly like the successful executive he had spent years trying to become. And suddenly, I wondered how many lies it took to build a man like that. Claire approached moments later, wearing a deep emerald gown that probably cost more than my monthly mortgage payment. "Vanessa," she said warmly, kissing my cheek lightly. "You look lovely." I looked directly into her eyes for the first time in weeks. "You too." For a split second, I saw fear underneath her polished smile. "Good." Olivia rushed over next and hugged me tightly around the waist. "Grandma, that almost destroyed me." I wrapped my arms around her and closed my eyes briefly. "Hi, sweetheart. You really came." "Of course I did." Olivia looked relieved in the innocent way children do when adults temporarily stop pretending everything is normal. "I saved you a seat near us," she said excitedly. I glanced toward the front tables. Family section. Of course, the perfect image. Ethan's successful life displayed neatly for everyone to admire. "Thank you," I said softly. As the evening continued, I watched Ethan move through the ballroom, greeting executives and investors with effortless confidence. Everyone loved him. That was the terrifying part. People kept approaching me smiling. "You must be Ethan's mother. You raised an incredible man. He speaks about family constantly. You should be so proud." Each compliment felt like another knife sliding slowly into my chest. Because they weren't seeing the real Ethan. They were seeing the performance. At one point, an older executive named Martin Keller shook my hand warmly. "Your son has extraordinary integrity," he said. "That's rare in finance nowadays." I almost stopped breathing. Integrity. I glanced across the room at Ethan laughing beside a group of executives while drinking champagne bought partly with my stolen retirement savings. For a moment, anger surged through me so strongly it nearly frightened me. Not rage, something colder. Moral disgust. Rebecca quietly approached my table an hour later. "You still okay?" "No," I whispered again. She nodded knowingly. "That's probably the last time you'll answer that question honestly tonight." The ceremony officially began shortly after 7:30. People settled into seats while lights dimmed around the ballroom. A large screen behind the stage displayed photographs of executives being promoted that year. When Ethan's picture appeared, applause filled the room immediately. Vice President of Finance Ethan Webb. The title glowed brightly behind him as he walked onto the stage. My son. The little boy who once slept curled against Richard's chest during thunderstorms. The teenager who cried after losing his first baseball championship. The man who now stood beneath chandeliers accepting praise while hiding theft behind tailored suits and corporate speeches. My heart hurt so badly I pressed my hand against my chest. Several executives gave speeches celebrating Ethan's leadership. Trustworthy, disciplined, exceptional character. Each word felt more unbearable than the last. Then Ethan stepped to the podium himself. The ballroom erupted in applause. He smiled modestly and adjusted the microphone. "I'm deeply honored tonight," he began smoothly. His voice sounded calm, professional, convincing. He thanked colleagues, mentors, investors, Claire, Olivia. Then finally his eyes found me near the front table. And most importantly, he said warmly, "My mother." The spotlight shifted toward me instantly. People turned smiling. Some applauded. I felt trapped beneath all those eyes. Ethan continued speaking. "My mother taught me the value of honesty, sacrifice, and integrity, long before I understood what those words really meant." My throat tightened so hard it hurt. She spent decades caring for others as a nurse while teaching me that character matters more than success. Applause filled the ballroom again. I looked at him standing there beneath golden lights, speaking publicly about integrity, while privately threatening to declare me mentally incompetent. And something inside me finally stopped breaking. Instead, it became still. Very still. Because suddenly, I understood clearly what this moment really was. Not simply a promotion, a lie. A beautifully packaged lie being applauded by hundreds of strangers. Ethan smiled toward me again. "Mom," he said softly into the microphone, "everything I am exists because of you." The room applauded once more. And that was the exact moment I realized I could not stay silent another second. The applause was still echoing through the ballroom when I pushed my chair back and stood up. For a second, nobody noticed. Then Ethan looked directly at me from the stage. His smile faltered slightly. I could see confusion in his eyes, maybe even concern. Because something about the way I stood must have felt different to him. Steady. Final. The event host smiled warmly from beside the podium. "Well," he laughed lightly, "I think Ethan's mother may want to say a few words herself." More applause. People turned toward me expectantly. I heard Diane inhale sharply beside me. Rebecca remained perfectly still. My legs felt weak as I walked toward the stage. Not because I doubted myself anymore, because every step felt like walking toward the end of my old life. The ballroom lights seemed painfully bright once I reached the front. Ethan stepped down from the podium immediately and leaned close to me. "Mom," he whispered tightly, still smiling for the audience. "What are you doing?" I looked at him quietly. Telling the truth. The color drained slightly from his face. For a brief second, panic flickered across his expression. Then he recovered instantly. Years of corporate training, public composure. He handed me the microphone with stiff politeness while the audience watched warmly, assuming they were witnessing a touching family moment. "My mother, Vanessa Webb," he announced. More applause. I stood there holding the microphone while hundreds of strangers smiled at me. And suddenly, I thought about every older woman who had ever been ignored because people assumed she was too emotional, too confused, or too weak to speak clearly. Not tonight. I took a slow breath. My son just said I taught him the value of honesty. Soft laughter and approving smiles spread across the room. At first, my voice shook slightly. That means more to me than he probably realizes. Ethan stood beside me with one hand casually resting near my back, like a supportive son. But I noticed his jaw tightening. I continued carefully. When you become a mother, you spend your entire life believing love can protect your children from becoming bad people. The room grew quieter. I saw Ethan glance toward Claire across the ballroom. She looked suddenly tense now, too. I tightened my grip on the microphone. I worked as a nurse for 36 years, I continued softly. My late husband, Richard, served in the Chicago Fire Department for nearly 4 decades. Several audience members nodded respectfully. We weren't wealthy people, but we believed in hard work. We believed integrity mattered more than appearances. The ballroom had become very still now. Something in my tone had changed the atmosphere. People were listening differently, more carefully. Ethan's smile looked strained. "Mom," he murmured softly beside me. "Maybe we should talk privately." I ignored him. "My husband died 5 years ago," I continued. "And after he passed, I trusted my son with everything." Now Ethan looked genuinely alarmed. He stepped closer. "Mom?" I turned toward him calmly. "Did you think I wouldn't eventually find out silence?" Absolute silence. I could almost feel confusion spreading through the ballroom like cold water. Ethan's face froze. Claire slowly stood from her table. "Vanessa," she said carefully, forcing a smile, "this isn't the time." "No," I interrupted quietly. "Actually, I think this is exactly the time." Several executives exchanged uneasy glances now. I heard someone near the back whisper something. Ethan lowered his voice sharply. "You need to stop." There was no warmth left in his tone anymore. Only fear. I looked directly at him. My son stole nearly $200,000 from my retirement accounts. The ballroom went dead silent. Not shocked silence. Vacuum silence. The kind where nobody even breathes. For one long second, Ethan simply stared at me. Then he laughed softly. A forced, disbelieving laugh. "Mom," he said into the microphone gently, "I think you're confused about some financial transactions we already discussed." There it was. Exactly what Rebecca predicted. Confused. I nodded slowly. "Yes," I said calmly. "You did discuss them. Right after my debit card was declined while buying blood pressure medication." Several people visibly shifted uncomfortably. Ethan's eyes darted toward the audience. He was calculating now. Damage control, public optics, corporate survival. "This really isn't appropriate," he said tightly. I kept my voice even. "You transferred my retirement savings into your company accounts." "That's not what happened." "You forged financial authority through manipulated paperwork." "Absolutely not. You used money your father and I spent 40 years saving." "Mom, and when I questioned you," I continued steadily, "you threatened to tell people I was mentally incompetent." Gasps spread quietly through the ballroom. Claire immediately stepped forward. "That is not true." I turned toward her. "You signed as witness on the power of attorney forms." Claire went pale instantly. A man near the front table, someone I later learned was the company's chief financial officer, stood slowly from his seat. "What exactly is happening here?" he asked carefully. Ethan straightened immediately. "This is a private family misunderstanding." "No," I said softly. "It's financial exploitation." The phrase landed heavily. I saw several executives exchange sharp looks immediately. Because people in finance understand exactly what those words mean. Ethan looked furious now beneath his controlled expression. "Mom, you are emotional right now." That almost made me smile. Because even then, even standing exposed in front of hundreds of people, he still thought the problem was my emotions instead of his actions. I reached into my purse slowly. Ethan's eyes widened instantly. Don't. I removed several folded documents calmly. Bank transfers, transaction histories, copies of signed authorizations. Rebecca stood near the ballroom entrance now beside two members of the company's human resources department. Ethan saw them at the exact same moment I did, and for the first time all night he looked genuinely afraid. Not irritated, not defensive, afraid. I handed one set of documents directly to the CFO. These are transfers from my retirement accounts into entities connected to my son. The man accepted them carefully, visibly unsettled. Ethan stepped toward me sharply. You had no right. No right. My voice finally cracked slightly. You took the last years of security your father worked himself half to death to build for me? The room stayed frozen. Nobody moved. Nobody interrupted. Because truth has a strange power once spoken aloud publicly. It becomes harder to bury. Ethan lowered his voice dangerously. You are humiliating yourself. I looked directly into my son's eyes. No, I whispered. I think I finally stopped humiliating myself the moment I stopped protecting you. That sentence hit him harder than anything else I'd said all night. I could see it, because suddenly he realized something devastating. The version of me he depended on, the quiet mother who absorbed pain silently, was gone. The CFO glanced quickly through several documents, his expression darkening more with each page. Another executive whispered urgently to someone beside him. Claire looked like she might faint. Then Ethan made one final desperate attempt. She doesn't understand how investment structures work, he said quickly to the room. This was temporary portfolio management. That's interesting, Rebecca interrupted calmly while stepping forward. Every head turned toward her. She opened her own folder slowly. Because we also have records showing significant transfers occurring while Mrs. Webb was hospitalized with a concussion. The silence afterward felt almost violent. Ethan stopped breathing for a second. I saw it happen. That tiny moment when he realized the entire lie was collapsing faster than he could control it. And standing there beneath crystal chandeliers while his perfect corporate image cracked apart in front of everyone, my son finally looked at me not as a helpless old woman, but as someone who could destroy him with the truth. The ballroom no longer felt like a celebration. It felt like a courtroom. Nobody touched their drinks anymore. Conversations had completely disappeared. Even the musicians near the stage sat frozen, uncertain whether they were witnessing a corporate scandal or a family collapse. Maybe both. Ethan stood beside me under the chandeliers, breathing hard through his nose, while trying desperately to maintain composure. But I knew my son well enough to recognize the truth. He was unraveling. The chief financial officer, Martin Keller, continued flipping through the documents Rebecca had handed him. Every few seconds, his expression darkened further. Finally, he looked up slowly. Ethan, he said carefully, what exactly are these transfers? Ethan immediately straightened his shoulders. Temporary personal investment restructuring. Martin's eyes narrowed. Using your mother's retirement accounts, it was authorized. I spoke quietly into the microphone again. Not honestly. The room remained painfully silent. Rebecca stepped beside me calmly, her voice controlled and professional. We have documented transfer records, medical timelines, and evidence showing Mrs. Webb was under concussion treatment during at least one major authorization period. A woman near the front table whispered, "Oh my God!" Ethan turned sharply toward Rebecca. You're exploiting an elderly woman's confusion. That sentence echoed through the ballroom, and for the first time all night, something inside me stopped hurting. Because hearing him say it publicly revealed exactly who he had become. I turned toward him slowly. "No, Ethan," I said softly. "You just said the quiet part out loud." Several executives exchanged uncomfortable looks immediately. Martin Keller's tone hardened. "Did you, or did you not, move money from your mother's retirement accounts into business-controlled entities?" Ethan hesitated, and that hesitation destroyed him more than any confession could have. Claire suddenly stepped forward from the audience. "Martin, this is being wildly misrepresented." She sounded panicked now. Gone was the polished elegance. Gone was the calm social smile. Only fear remained. This was a private family matter, she insisted. Vanessa agreed to help temporarily. I looked directly at her. "Then why did you both hide it from me?" Claire opened her mouth. Nothing came out. Rebecca calmly removed another document from her folder. "We also have email correspondence." Ethan's head snapped toward her instantly. Fear flashed openly across his face now. Rebecca continued evenly. "One message from Ethan Webb states, quote, 'I'll move it back before she notices.'" Gasps spread through the room again. Someone near the back muttered, "Jesus Christ." Ethan stepped forward aggressively. "That email is out of context." Rebecca didn't flinch. "Would you like me to read the rest?" Silence. Because he already knew what the rest said. Martin Keller looked physically ill now. "You used company-connected accounts," Ethan answered quickly. "Temporarily." Martin closed his eyes briefly. Then another executive, a woman from compliance named Sandra Liu, stood from her table holding a folder of her own. I knew I recognized the account numbers, she said quietly. Every eye turned toward her. Sandra looked directly at Martin. "These are some of the same flagged entities we've been reviewing internally." The room exploded into murmurs immediately. Ethan looked stunned. For the first time all night, he genuinely lost control of his expression. Not polished discomfort. Panic. Real panic. Martin's voice became dangerously calm. "Ethan, were you under active financial review during this promotion process?" Sandra answered before he could continue. Actually, preliminary compliance monitoring had already begun. The silence afterward felt crushing. Claire grabbed Ethan's arm. "Say something." But what could he say? The truth was already standing naked in front of everyone. I looked at my son standing beneath the giant screen, displaying his smiling executive portrait. Vice President of Finance, Ethical Leadership Award recipient. The irony felt unbearable. Then Ethan turned toward me suddenly, and for the first time all night, the mask cracked completely. "This is your fault," he hissed quietly. I blinked in disbelief. "My fault? You had no idea what pressure I was under." "There it is," Rebecca said softly beside me. Ethan ignored her completely. "You think money just appears? You think people survive in this industry by being weak?" His voice rose louder now. I was trying to hold everything together. Several executives stared at him in shock, because now they weren't seeing the polished corporate leader anymore. They were seeing desperation, entitlement, collapse. "You stole from your mother," Martin said flatly. Ethan whipped toward him immediately. "I was going to replace it." When no answer, Martin continued quietly. "Before or after the promotion?" That question hit like a gunshot. Ethan looked trapped, because everyone in the room suddenly understood the same horrifying thing. The promotion mattered because Ethan needed it financially. Bonuses, authority, reputation, access. He hadn't just stolen money. He had built his future on deception. Claire's voice cracked suddenly. We were drowning. The ballroom turned toward her. Tears filled her eyes now. Not graceful tears, exhausted ones. "You don't understand how bad it got," she whispered. Ethan stared at her in shock. Claire. No! She snapped suddenly. Months of pressure burst out of her at once. You kept saying one more deal would fix everything, one more promotion, one more investment. She looked toward me then, and for the first time since this nightmare began, I saw actual shame in her face. Not manipulation, not strategy. Shame. We never thought it would go this far, she whispered. I felt suddenly exhausted beyond words, because underneath all the betrayal and lies and greed, the truth was painfully simple. They had chosen appearances over honesty, and now everything was collapsing anyway. Olivia stood frozen near one of the front tables, crying silently. That sight nearly broke me. Even now, even standing in the ruins of my family, my first instinct was still to protect my granddaughter. Ethan noticed her too. His expression shifted instantly, not toward guilt, toward anger. This should never have happened publicly. I looked at him quietly. You had months to tell the truth privately. That silenced him. Martin handed the documents to another executive carefully. Ethan, he said, voice now fully corporate, I need you to step away from the event immediately. The words echoed heavily. Step away? Corporate language for disgrace. Claire started crying harder. Ethan looked around the ballroom wildly, as if searching for someone to save him. Nobody moved, because powerful people disappear quickly once scandal enters the room. Sandra from compliance spoke next. Your access credentials will be suspended pending investigation. Suspended. Another word that changed lives. Ethan's breathing became uneven. You're destroying my career? I stared at him. No, Ethan, I whispered. You destroyed it the moment you decided your mother's life savings mattered less than your image. That finally broke something in him. His shoulders sagged. His face collapsed inward slightly. And suddenly, he no longer looked like a polished executive. He looked like a frightened little boy trapped inside a grown man's terrible choices. For one heartbreaking second, I saw the child I once rocked to sleep after nightmares. Then the moment disappeared. Because children make mistakes. Adults make decisions. And Ethan had made his. Martin gestured quietly toward hotel security near the ballroom entrance. Not aggressively, not dramatically, but the message was clear. The celebration was over. The promotion was dead, and my son's carefully constructed world had just shattered publicly beneath crystal chandeliers, while hundreds of strangers watched in silence. After the ballroom emptied, I found myself standing alone near the back hallway outside the elevators. The adrenaline that had carried me through the confrontation was fading fast now. In its place came exhaustion. Deep, bone-level exhaustion. I leaned against the wall for a moment and closed my eyes. Somewhere down the corridor, hotel staff quietly rolled carts over marble floors. Distant voices echoed faintly from the lobby downstairs. Life continuing, as if my family hadn't just collapsed in public. Diane approached first. You okay? It was almost funny hearing that question again. No, I wasn't okay. I had just destroyed my son's promotion ceremony in front of hundreds of people. But strangely, I also no longer felt afraid. I don't know what I feel, I admitted softly. Diane squeezed my hand gently. You told the truth. Rebecca joined us moments later. Corporate compliance requested copies of all documentation, she said quietly. This is moving very quickly now. I nodded numbly. Nothing about this felt real anymore. Then I heard Ethan's voice behind me. Mom. Every muscle in my body tightened instantly. I turned slowly. He stood at the far end of the hallway alone now. No executives, no applause, no polished confidence. Just my son in a tuxedo that suddenly looked too expensive and too tight around the shoulders. His face looked pale beneath the hotel lights. Older somehow? Broken. Diane immediately stepped forward protectively. You don't get to corner her alone? I just want to talk. Rebecca studied him coldly for several seconds. Then she looked at me. Your decision. Part of me wanted to walk away immediately. Another part needed to hear him speak without an audience for the first time all night. I'll be fine, I said quietly. Neither Diane nor Rebecca looked convinced, but eventually they moved a short distance away down the hallway, still watching carefully. Ethan and I stood facing each other in silence. The distance between us felt enormous. Finally, he spoke. You humiliated me. Not hello, not I'm sorry. You humiliated me. I stared at him for several seconds. You stole from me. His jaw tightened. I already said I was going to pay it back. When he looked away, that answer was enough. For a moment, neither of us spoke again. Then Ethan rubbed both hands over his face tiredly. You have no idea what happened to me. Something about the sentence unsettled me. Not because it excused anything, because part of me still wanted to understand. What happened? I asked quietly. He laughed bitterly. Everything. His voice sounded raw now, not polished anymore, not controlled, just tired. I lost nearly $300,000 in 6 months. My stomach tightened. Ethan leaned against the wall heavily. It started with one bad investment, then another, then another. I stayed silent. You know what happens in finance when people smell weakness? He continued quietly. They destroy you. So you stole from your mother. I borrowed from you. No, Ethan. My voice cracked slightly. You hid it from me. You manipulated paperwork. You threatened my mental competency. He closed his eyes briefly. I panicked. The honesty in those 2 words hurt more than denial would have, because for the first time, he sounded human again. Not innocent. Human. I kept thinking I could fix it before you noticed, he whispered. That's what addicts say. His eyes snapped toward mine. What? People who gamble. People who lie. People who destroy families while promising they'll repair everything later. That hit him hard. I could see it. He looked down at the floor. You think I'm some kind of monster now? I swallowed painfully. No. Then what do you think? I looked at him carefully. And for the first time in months, I answered honestly. I think you became someone willing to sacrifice other people to protect your image. The hallway fell silent again. Ethan's eyes filled suddenly with something I hadn't seen in a very long time. Shame. Real shame. I was drowning, he whispered. I nodded slowly, and instead of telling the truth, you pulled me underwater with you. That made him physically flinch. For several seconds, he couldn't speak at all. Then finally, Claire knew part of it, not everything. I stared at him. She thought it was temporary restructuring at first. By the time she realized how bad it had become, he laughed weakly. We were already trapped. The word lingered heavily between us. Trapped. I thought about the marble kitchen renovations, the luxury vacations, the expensive clothes. People rarely notice traps when the trap still looks glamorous. What happened tonight? I asked quietly. Was any of it real? He frowned. What do you mean when you talked about integrity, about Dad, about me? His face collapsed slightly. That part was real. I almost cried hearing that. because somehow the truth made everything even sadder. Ethan stepped closer slowly. You think I stopped loving you? I looked at him for a very long time before answering. No. That surprised him. I think you loved success more. Tears filled his eyes immediately. I was trying to survive, and I would have helped you. That finally broke him. Completely. He looked at me like I had struck him across the face. You don't know that. Yes, I whispered fiercely. I do. My own tears came then, because this was the part destroying me most. Not the money, not the scandal, the fact that my son never gave me the chance to help him honestly. You could have come to me, I said, voice shaking. You could have sat at my kitchen table and told me the truth. He stared at the floor silently. I would have sold the house if I had to, I continued softly. I would have helped protect Olivia. I would have stood beside you. His breathing became uneven, but instead I whispered, You decided I was easier to manipulate than trust. That sentence shattered whatever composure he had left. He sat down heavily on a hallway bench and buried his face in his hands. I didn't know how to stop, he admitted. And suddenly, I saw it clearly. Not just greed, fear, cowardice, pride. A man so terrified of appearing unsuccessful that he destroyed the people who loved him most. After several minutes, Ethan finally looked back up at me. What happens now? Such a small question, such devastating consequences behind it. I wiped my eyes slowly. I honestly don't know. You're pressing charges I haven't decided. That was true. Because despite everything, my heart still split in two every time I looked at him. One part saw betrayal. The other still saw my little boy. Ethan nodded slowly, like he expected nothing else. Then quietly, he said the one thing I never expected to hear. The worst part isn't losing the promotion. I waited silently. It's realizing Dad would be ashamed of me. That almost broke me completely. Because Richard had adored Ethan. Absolutely adored him. And hearing my son finally acknowledge the moral collapse beneath everything else felt unbearable somehow. I already lost you before tonight, I whispered. Ethan looked stricken. No, yes. Tears slid down my face again. I lost you the moment you decided your own mother was a problem to manage instead of a person to love. He looked like he wanted to argue, but he couldn't. Because deep down, he knew it was true. We stood there in silence for a long time, not healed, not reconciled, just broken people standing in the ruins of trust. Then finally, I stepped back toward the elevators. Mom? I paused. I don't know if I can forgive this yet, I said honestly. His face crumpled slightly. But I hope someday you become someone worth forgiving. And with that, I walked away from my son while he sat alone in the empty hotel hallway, wearing the remains of the life he had destroyed himself. The weeks after the promotion ceremony felt strangely quiet. Not peaceful, just quiet in the way a house becomes quiet after a storm tears through it and leaves everything standing but damaged. For the first few days, I barely left home. News traveled faster than I expected. People from church called pretending they just wanted to check in, but I could hear curiosity hiding underneath their kindness. Neighbors suddenly became awkward. Some avoided eye contact entirely. Others looked at me with soft pity that somehow felt worse. Apparently, one of the executives at the hotel had posted anonymously online about a finance executive exposed by his own mother during promotion ceremony. By the end of the week, everyone seemed to know some version of the story. Diane warned me not to read comments online. Of course I read them anyway. Some people called me brave. others called me cruel. One comment hurt more than all the others combined. A mother should protect her child no matter what. I stared at that sentence for nearly an hour, because part of me still believed it too, even after everything. Meanwhile, Ethan disappeared from public view almost immediately. Grand Lakes Financial Group officially announced he had been placed on administrative suspension pending investigation. Administrative suspension. Such clean corporate words for devastation. Claire moved Olivia temporarily to her sister's house in Milwaukee, while reporters and investigators circled around Ethan's collapsing career. And through all of it, I kept expecting to feel victorious. Instead, I felt hollow. One afternoon, about 2 weeks later, I stood in the grocery store staring blankly at soup cans, while another woman whispered my name 3 aisles over. "That's her," someone murmured quietly. I left without buying anything. Humiliation doesn't disappear just because you're technically the victim. At home, the silence became unbearable sometimes. No Ethan dropping by unexpectedly. No Olivia painting at the dining room table. No family dinners. The emptiness hurt more than anger now. I found myself wandering through the house, touching old photographs constantly. Ethan at age 6, holding a fishing pole beside Richard. Ethan graduating college. Our last Christmas before everything collapsed. In every picture, we looked like a normal family. That realization haunted me most. How easily love and deception can exist side by side. One rainy Thursday evening, there was a knock at my front door. When I opened it, Olivia stood there alone, holding a small overnight bag. My heart nearly stopped. Olivia. Her eyes were swollen red from crying. "Can I come in?" I pulled her into my arms immediately. She held onto me so tightly it hurt. "I'm sorry," she whispered against my shoulder. "Oh, sweetheart." I brought her inside quickly and made hot chocolate, even though neither of us really drank it. She sat at the kitchen table, quietly twisting a napkin between her fingers. "Does your mother know you're here?" She dropped me off. That surprised me. "Claire's outside." Olivia nodded weakly. I looked through the front window and saw Claire sitting in her SUV, gripping the steering wheel motionlessly. She looked exhausted. Not glamorous anymore. Just tired. Very tired. Olivia stared down at the table. "Dad's really bad." My stomach tightened. "What do you mean he barely leaves the house now?" Something about hearing that frightened me more than I expected, because despite everything, he was still my son. Olivia's voice cracked. "I heard him crying last night." That image shattered me instantly. I looked away quickly before she could see tears filling my eyes. Children should never have to carry their parents' collapse. "He keeps saying Grandpa would hate him," she whispered. I covered my mouth with trembling fingers. Then Olivia looked directly at me. "Are you going to send Dad to jail?" The question hit like a physical blow. I sat down slowly beside her. "I don't know. Mom says everything's falling apart." I closed my eyes briefly. The terrible thing about consequences is that they rarely hurt only the guilty. Collateral damage spreads everywhere. Olivia suddenly pulled something from her bag. A small wooden box. I recognized it instantly. Richard's memory box. My breath caught. "Dad found this in the attic," she said quietly. "He said maybe you should have it." My hands shook as I opened it. Inside were old photographs, military pins from Richard's father birthday cards, and folded letters tied together with faded blue ribbon. One envelope had Ethan's name written across the front in Richard's handwriting. I stared at it for several seconds before opening it carefully. The letter was dated 16 years earlier. Ethan had just graduated college. My vision blurred as I read. Son's success means nothing if you lose your character getting there. The world will always tempt you to measure yourself by money, titles, and appearances. Don't fall for it. A man's real worth is how he treats people when nobody is watching, especially family. Take care of your mother someday, the way she's always taken care of us. Love, Dad. I started crying before I even finished reading. Not graceful tears. Deep, painful ones that seemed pulled from somewhere ancient inside me. Olivia moved beside me immediately and wrapped her arms around my shoulders. I miss Grandpa too, she whispered. I held her tightly while grief flooded the room again. Not just grief for Richard anymore. Grief for the family we used to be. Later that night, after Olivia fell asleep in the guest room, Claire finally came inside. She stood awkwardly near the kitchen doorway, still wearing expensive clothes that no longer matched the exhausted woman inside them. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. Then she quietly said, "I'm sorry." I looked at her carefully, and for the first time since this began, she seemed completely stripped of performance. No manipulation, no polished smile, just regret. I should have stopped him sooner, she whispered. I stayed silent. Claire wrapped both arms around herself tightly. At first, I thought it really was temporary. Then things got worse and worse. Her eyes filled with tears. And honestly, I liked the life too much to ask hard questions. That honesty surprised me, painfully. I hated you for a while, she admitted softly. After the ceremony, I nodded slowly. I know, but now, her voice cracked. Now I think maybe you saved him from becoming someone even worse. The sentence stunned me, because I hadn't considered that possibility at all. I thought I had destroyed my son. The idea that exposure might someday save him felt almost impossible to process. Claire wiped her eyes. He started therapy this week. I stared at her. He did. She nodded. He finally admitted he has a problem with gambling and financial risk obsession. The room fell silent. Then she whispered something that stayed with me long after she left. He kept saying success felt like oxygen. Like if he stopped winning, he would disappear. After Claire drove away, I sat alone in the kitchen, holding Richard's old letter. Outside, rain tapped softly against the windows. And for the first time since everything shattered, I allowed myself to admit a painful truth. I still loved my son. But loving someone did not mean protecting them from the consequences of who they had become. 6 months after the promotion ceremony, I met my son at a small park beside Lake Michigan. The trees were beginning to turn gold with early autumn, and cold wind rolled off the water hard enough to sting my cheeks. Chicago always looks beautiful in the fall. Richard used to say the city became honest once summer disappeared. No distractions, no pretending, just cold air and truth. I arrived early and sat on a weathered bench overlooking the lake. My hands stayed wrapped tightly around a paper coffee cup, mostly for warmth. Part of me still couldn't believe I had agreed to see Ethan alone again. But over the past few months, small things had changed. Not dramatically, not magically, just slowly, painfully, like bones healing crooked after a break. The legal process moved forward faster than I expected. Ethan avoided criminal charges through a settlement agreement, partial asset liquidation, and mandatory financial restitution. Rebecca explained that several factors worked in his favor: first-time offense history, voluntary cooperation after exposure, and documented treatment enrollment for compulsive gambling behavior. I remember feeling relieved and guilty about that relief at the same time. Most of my retirement money was eventually recovered through insurance claims, investment liquidation, and repayment arrangements. Not all of it, but enough that I no longer feared losing my home. Grand Lakes Financial permanently terminated Ethan's employment. The corporate investigation uncovered additional ethical violations connected to undisclosed financial risks, though nothing as severe as what he had done to me. Apparently, my son had been unraveling professionally long before I realized it personally. Claire stayed with her sister for nearly 2 months before returning home cautiously. Their marriage survived somehow, though both admitted it looked nothing like it once had. Maybe honesty destroys some marriages, or maybe it strips away illusions and leaves people staring at whatever remains underneath. I honestly don't know. As for Ethan, therapy changed him in ways I didn't expect. Not instantly. At first, he still sounded defensive during the few conversations we had through lawyers and family counseling. But gradually, the excuses disappeared. Then the self-pity disappeared too. One afternoon, about 3 months after the ceremony, a handwritten letter arrived in my mailbox. Not an email, not a text. A real letter. From Ethan. I must have stared at the envelope for 10 minutes before opening it. Inside were 6 pages written entirely in his uneven handwriting. No justifications, no manipulation, no blame, just truth. He admitted he became addicted to appearing successful. He confessed that every promotion and luxury purchase temporarily made him feel worthy, but the feeling never lasted long enough. He wrote that stealing from me had initially felt impossible, then temporary, then necessary, then normal. That sentence haunted me, because evil rarely arrives all at once. Sometimes it enters quietly through rationalization, one compromised value at a time. Near the end of the letter, Ethan wrote something that made me cry harder than anything else since Richard died. I kept telling myself I was protecting my family, but the truth is, I was protecting my ego. I cared more about looking successful than being honest. Dad warned me exactly about this in his letter, and I became the man he feared anyway. I read those words over and over again, not because they erased what happened. Nothing could erase it. But because for the first time, my son sounded accountable instead of afraid. And accountability changes people. Not perfectly, but genuinely. A week later, he asked if I would meet him by the lake. Now here I was, waiting, nervous in a way I hadn't expected. Then I saw him walking toward me across the path, and for a moment I barely recognized him. The expensive suits were gone. No luxury watch, no polished executive image. He looked thinner, quieter, human. When he reached the bench, he stopped several feet away. "Hi, Mom." My throat tightened instantly. "Hi." For several awkward seconds, neither of us moved. Then Ethan sat carefully at the far end of the bench. Not close enough to touch me. Maybe because he understood he hadn't earned that closeness back yet. We watched the lake silently for a while. Finally, he spoke. I almost didn't come. I glanced at him. "Why?" "Because I wasn't sure you'd want to see me." The honesty in that answer surprised me. Old Ethan would have defended himself. New Ethan sounded uncertain, humbled. I wasn't sure either, I admitted. He nodded slowly. "That's fair." The wind blew fallen leaves across the path between us. Then Ethan reached into his coat pocket and handed me something folded carefully in half. A cashier's check. Final repayment installment. My fingers trembled slightly as I took it. "That's everything," he said quietly. Every dollar I still owed. I stared down at the check for several seconds, then back at him. "Thank you." The words felt strange, not because I wasn't grateful, because no mother imagines one day thanking her son for returning stolen retirement money. Ethan looked down at his hands. I know saying sorry isn't enough. No, I whispered. It isn't. He nodded again without arguing. Another change. For a long moment, we sat listening to waves strike the shoreline softly below us. Then Ethan spoke again. I hated you after the ceremony. I looked at him calmly. I know. I told myself you ruined my life. His voice cracked slightly. But therapy forced me to admit something. I waited silently. You didn't ruin my life. He swallowed hard. You stopped me before I ruined myself completely. Tears filled my eyes immediately. Because those words cost him something real to say. I looked out across the lake quickly before speaking again. I didn't expose you because I stopped loving you. Ethan's face tightened painfully. I know that now. I did it because I couldn't watch you become worse. He covered his mouth briefly with trembling fingers. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. Then quietly he asked, Do you think you'll ever forgive me? Such a fragile question. I thought carefully before answering. I already forgave the little boy you used to be. His eyes filled instantly. But forgiveness for the man you became? I paused softly. That's going to take time. He nodded slowly. I understand. And strangely enough, I believed him. Not because trust had magically returned. Trust doesn't work that way. Once broken, it rebuilds slowly through consistent truth, not emotional promises. But for the first time in a very long while, Ethan sounded willing to live honestly instead of perform honesty. And maybe that matters. Eventually, the sun began lowering over the lake, painting the water gold and orange. I smiled faintly. Your father always wanted us to visit Maine together someday. Ethan looked at me. You should still go. I am. His eyebrows lifted slightly. Really? I nodded. Diane's coming with me next month. For the first time all afternoon, a small, genuine smile touched his face. Dad would like that. Tears blurred my vision again. Yes, I whispered. I think he would. When we finally stood to leave, Ethan hesitated awkwardly, then quietly asked, Can I hug you? My heart broke all over again, because once upon a time, my son never needed permission. I stepped toward him slowly, and when he wrapped his arms around me, I realized something important. Healing does not mean forgetting. Love does not erase accountability. And sometimes, the most painful form of love is refusing to let someone continue destroying themselves unchecked. I held my son tightly for only a few seconds before stepping back. Not because I stopped loving him, because some boundaries must remain visible while trust learns how to breathe again. As I walked back toward my car beside the cold Chicago lake, I realized something else too. For the first time in a very long while, I no longer felt afraid of the future.